Hello everybody, David Abram here. Welcome back to my channel as always. And for today's video, I wanted to stray away from the usual topics. And for this video, I wanted to talk about a topic that I think a lot of the MGTOWs in the MGTOW community already know or are already aware of. But for this video, I want to talk about the effects that the state has on the gender relations and how if there was no state, or if the state existed in a different presence as it does now, then the gender relations would actually be entirely different. Like, for example, think back to the mid-20th century, let's say, the Western world in the mid-20th century before the second wave feminist movement came about. So, 20s, 30s, and 40s, and in the 50s. Before we had things like alimony, before we had basically just before we had second wave feminism, I mean, the scene was entirely different. The dating scene was probably radically different. Marriage was probably radically different. There was so many elements of society, Western society, that was just a dramatic difference in comparison to today. And this leads me to the topic of, is the state really the underminer in gender relations? Because think about it, I mean, 78% divorce rate by women is really because the state allows that, with the divorce courts and the divorce laws and the biased court systems and the politicians who are up on their pedestals passing legislation to push these laws into effect. I mean, just think about it. If there was literally a smaller presence in government than what we currently have. I mean, not saying I'm an anarchist. I just think gender relations would be radically different and radically transformed in the absence of a big government and instead a small government. Like, let's just say we did away with alimony, we did away with child support, we did away with rape culture, we did away with the sexual harassments, and the sexual harassments being taken out of context. We did away with the definition of rape, the biased definition of rape, which has also been taken out of context. Let's just imagine if all of that was done away with. This is all hypothetical, of course, as MGTOWs and as red pillars, we know this probably won't happen, at least not anytime soon. But just imagine if all this was eradicated and the tyranny of the state was non-existent, and instead of a big government, there was a small government. Just imagine what the gender relations would be like. I think the gender relations, and as a MGTOW, I think the gender relations would ultimately go back to preferably a time before the second wave feminist movement came around, which I think was the 60s or the 70s. But this leads me to segue into, I think, another important distinguished observation to make, and that is, in my opinion as a MGTOW, and I don't speak for all MGTOWs, but I think the real underminer pulling the strings to divide and conquer is the state, and the state in itself. Even though, let's say, women may be naturally hypergamous, or naturally wanting to pursue someone who is higher up in the hierarchy ladder, without a state to back them up and to stand guard, it would be an equal playground or a leavening ball game. So in other words, if we decided to act on our biological impulses and jump right into things such as marriage, relationships, and long-term relationships and having children, it would be relatively okay and safe to do so, given that setting of small government and the eradication of all the things I mentioned above. And the reason I did this video was that I really think, in essence, as a MGTOW, the real underminer to point the fingers on would have to be the state. I mean, just think about the second wave feminist movement. Who allowed the birth control pill to be into effect? The state. Who pushed and passed legislation for alimony? Feminists, yeah, but the state ultimately was the determiner of that. Who created and forged for the feminists a biased court system, a biased divorce court system, biased divorce laws, and just overall a bias towards men? Who created all this? Was it really women? Or maybe to some degree, but truth be told, I think it was more or less the state. And I think if it hadn't been for the state, a lot of the problems we currently have concerning gender relations in the West would be non-existent. But I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you agree, disagree? You think I'm onto something? Like, dislike? If you have any comments, please do feel free to leave them in the comments section below. Because as a MGTOW, it's my view that the real underminer is not women, or even feminists for that matter, but feminists are part of it, but more or less the tyranny of the state. Because, like it or not, as MGTOWs and as Red Pillars, we know that when we sign that dotted line and we swear that oath till death do us part, we are truly at the mercies of the state. Thanks for watching.